There is a man who drives a 20-year-old Honda Civic. The paint is faded, the interior is worn. The car makes a sound when it starts that suggests it might not start forever. He parks it next to gleaming BMWs and freshly washed Teslas, and if you saw him walking into the building, you would assume he was the janitor, or maybe a delivery driver, certainly not someone who belonged in the same rooms as the people driving those expensive cars. His clothes are unremarkable, his watch is not a watch anyone would notice, his shoes are functional and forgettable. Everything about his appearance suggests a man who is struggling, or at least a man who has not made it, a man who exists in the economic middle or lower middle, getting by but certainly not thriving. That man is worth $47 million. This is not a made-up story for motivational effect. This is a real phenomenon, repeated across the country, across income levels, across industries. The people who actually have money often look like they do not, and the people who look like they have money often have almost nothing except the carefully curated appearance of success. This inversion is not accidental, it is not ironic, it is logical, and understanding why it is logical will change everything about how you think about money, status, and what it actually means to be wealthy. But before I explain why looking poor is a strategic advantage, I need to show you what looking rich actually costs. Not just in dollars, though the dollars are staggering, in freedom, in peace, in the ability to live a life that belongs to you rather than a performance that belongs to your audience. Because that is what status spending really is, a performance. And performances have costs that extend far beyond the price tag. Let us start with the most obvious cost, the one you can calculate on a spreadsheet. The average new car in America costs somewhere around $50,000. The average luxury car costs significantly more, and the moment you drive that car off the lot, it begins losing value at a rate that would horrify you if you thought about it clearly. 20% in the first year, 30 to 40% by year 3. By year 5, that $50,000 car is worth maybe $20,000, and you have been paying interest on the loan the entire time. You have not just spent $50,000, you have spent $50,000 plus interest, minus the depreciation, which means you have paid perhaps $60,000 or $70,000 for the privilege of owning something now worth $20,000. But here is what makes this worse. You did not buy the car because you needed it. You needed transportation, certainly, but transportation can be purchased for $5,000, $10,000. The difference between what transportation costs and what you paid is not transportation. It is status. It is the feeling of pulling into the parking lot and knowing that people see you as successful. It is the brief dopamine hit of a stranger glancing at your car with what you interpret as admiration or envy. It is the story you tell yourself about who you are, a story written in leather seats and German engineering. And this is where it gets psychologically interesting. That dopamine hit, that feeling of status confirmation, does not last. It cannot last. There is a phenomenon that psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, and it is the engine that drives most financial self-destruction. The hedonic treadmill describes the human tendency to return to a baseline level of happiness, regardless of positive or negative changes in circumstances. You get the luxury car. You feel amazing for a week, maybe a month. And then the car becomes normal. It becomes just your car. The leather seats are no longer exciting. They are simply where you sit. The admiring glances, if they ever existed, become invisible to you. The baseline reasserts itself and you feel exactly the same as you did before the purchase. But now you have a car payment. Now you have higher insurance. Now you have the anxiety of protecting something expensive from scratches and dings. The happiness is gone, but the costs remain. And here is the cruelest part. Because you have adapted to the luxury car, your old car, the one that was perfectly functional and that you never thought about, now seems inadequate. If you had to return to it, you would feel like you were going backwards. The upgrade has not made you happier. It has made you more sensitive to downgrade. It has raised the floor of what you consider acceptable, which means you now need more money just to feel the same as you did before. The treadmill keeps spinning. You keep running, and you never arrive anywhere. This pattern applies to everything. The phone that seemed incredible 3 years ago now seems slow and outdated, not because it changed, but because your reference point changed. The apartment that felt spacious when you moved in now feels cramped because you have seen bigger apartments and imagined yourself in them. The clothes, the restaurants, the vacations, the neighborhoods, all of it recalibrates upward as you spend more, and the recalibration erases any happiness gain while preserving all the financial cost. You're paying more to feel the same. You're running faster to stay in place, and the only people benefiting are the companies selling you the next upgrade. Social media has accelerated this to an almost unbearable degree. You're no longer comparing yourself to your neighbours, your co-workers, the people in your actual physical community. You are comparing yourself to curated highlight reels from millions of strangers, each one presenting their best moments, their most expensive purchases, their most photogenic experiences. The comparison pool has expanded to include everyone, which means you are always losing. There is always someone with a nicer car, a bigger house, and more exotic vacation. There is always someone making you feel like you are falling behind, and so you spend to keep up. Not because spending makes you happy, but because not spending makes you anxious. The hedonic treadmill has become a hedonic marathon, and the finish line keeps moving because the people setting it are incentivized to ensure you never arrive. But here is the question nobody asks. What if you stepped off the treadmill entirely? What if you simply refused to play? What if, instead of trying to signal success through consumption, you pursued something that status spending makes almost impossible? What if you pursued freedom? Let me tell you what freedom actually looks like, because it does not look like what you have been taught. Freedom does not look like a big house with a big mortgage. Freedom does not look like a luxury car with a payment that arrives every month like a debt collector. Freedom does not look like a wardrobe full of designer clothes that require careful maintenance and eventual replacement with newer designer clothes. All of those things are the opposite of freedom. They are obligations. They are commitments of future income to maintain a present appearance. They are chains that look like prizes. Freedom looks like options. Freedom looks like the ability to quit a job you hate without financial catastrophe. Freedom looks like taking 6 months off to figure out what you actually want to do with your life. Freedom looks like saying no to opportunities that pay well but cost your soul, because you do not need the money badly enough to accept the compromise. Freedom looks like a gap between your income and your expenses so wide that losing your income would be inconvenient rather than devastating. Freedom looks, from the outside, like you're not doing very well, because the visible markers of success and the actual conditions of freedom are almost perfectly opposed. I want to tell you about a transformation I witnessed because it illustrates this point better than any abstraction could. There was someone I knew a few years ago who earned a significant income, 6 figures, the kind of money that most people imagine would solve all their problems. And from the outside, life looked enviable. Nice apartment in an expensive city, wardrobe that signaled success, car that announced arrival, restaurant meals that generated social media content. Every visible indicator suggested someone who had made it, someone who was winning the game that everyone else was playing. But inside, there was constant anxiety. The income was high, but the obligations were higher. The apartment required a rent payment that consumed 1/3 of post-tax income. The car required a payment and insurance and maintenance and parking. The wardrobe required continuous refreshment because fashion changes and status requires keeping up. The restaurants required reciprocal social engagements, and those engagements required more wardrobe and more transportation and more everything. The lifestyle was not funded by wealth. It was funded by cash flow, and cash flow can stop. The anxiety was about what would happen if the cash flow stopped, if the job disappeared, if the income dropped, if any of the assumptions underlying this precarious structure proved false. There was no buffer, there was no margin. There was only the treadmill running faster and faster and the growing suspicion that one stumble would mean collapse. And then something changed. The decision was made to step off, to reduce the apartment to something modest, to sell the car and buy something that worked but signaled nothing, to stop refreshing the wardrobe and let the clothes wear until they needed replacing for functional reasons, not fashion reasons, to decline the social engagements that required expensive reciprocity, to live, deliberately and intentionally, as if the income were half of what it actually was. The first thing that happened was financial. The gap between income and expenses, which had been approximately zero, became substantial. Money that had been disappearing into lifestyle maintenance started accumulating. Within a year, an emergency fund existed that had never existed before. Within 2 years, investments had grown to a level that provided genuine security. The number in the accounts was not impressive by wealth standards, but it was transformative by freedom standards. For the first time, leaving the job was possible. Not easy, not comfortable, but possible. The job no longer had total power. The leverage had shifted. But the second thing that happened was psychological, and it was more important than the money. The anxiety decreased, not because circumstances were better, but because the vulnerability had been addressed. High fixed costs create a kind of constant background stress, a low-grade fear that hums beneath everything else. You might not even notice it until it is gone. But when the fixed costs dropped, when the margin widened, when the gap between income and necessity became substantial, the fear quieted. Sleep improved, decisions improved, creativity improved. The mental bandwidth that had been consumed by managing a precarious financial structure was suddenly available for other things. And this points to something that the status game obscures: the relationship between complexity and stress. Every possession you own requires attention. It requires maintenance, organization, protection, eventual replacement. The luxury car needs more careful handling than the beater. The designer wardrobe needs more thoughtful storage than the functional clothes. The big apartment needs more furniture, more cleaning, more everything. Complexity accumulates with every upgrade, and complexity is not neutral. Complexity is a tax on your mental resources, paid every day, usually without your conscious awareness. There is a reason that minimalism has become popular among people who can afford not to be minimalists. It is not because owning less is fashionable. It is because owning less creates mental space. The KonMari method and its derivatives are not really about tidying. They're about cognitive load. Every object you own occupies a small part of your attention, and the sum of those small parts is not small. Reducing possessions is not deprivation. It is liberation. The person with a modest apartment and functional belongings is not suffering. They are unburdened. They have chosen a different optimization, one that maximizes peace rather than appearance. But let me push this further, because the benefits of looking poor extend beyond finances and psychology. They extend to relationships. And this is where the logic becomes almost counterintuitive. When you signal wealth, you attract people who are attracted to wealth. This sounds obvious, but think about what it means. The person who approaches you because of your expensive car is not approaching you. They are approaching the car. The person who wants to date you because of your designer wardrobe is not interested in who you are. They're interested in what you can provide. The relationships formed under conditions of status signaling are, to some degree, transactional. They are contingent on the continuation of the signal. They are not about you. They are about what you represent. Interintuitive. This is why so many wealthy people report loneliness and relational difficulty. Their wealth has become a filter that screens out authentic connection. They can never be sure if people like them or like their money. They can never be sure if the friendship would survive financial reversal. They are trapped in relationships that are conditional, on conditions they might not always be able to meet. Now consider the opposite. When you look poor, when you signal nothing, you attract people who are attracted to you. Your personality, your humor, your interests, your actual self, unmediated by status markers. The relationships that form are not about what you can provide. They are about who you are. And these relationships have a durability that status-dependent relationships can never achieve. They survive financial changes because they were never based on finances. They deepen over time because they are built on authentic foundations. This is not to say that you should deceive people about your financial situation. Deception is not the point. The point is that signaling less allows you to filter for people who value more than signals. The point is that authenticity becomes possible when you're not performing. The point is that when you stop trying to impress, you start attracting people who cannot be impressed in that way, and those are usually the people worth knowing. And here we arrive at what might be the deepest truth in this entire discussion: the relationship between external display and internal security. We have been taught, implicitly and explicitly, that confidence comes from accomplishment, and that accomplishment should be displayed. The successful person shows their success. The confident person projects their confidence through visible markers, but this formulation has it exactly backwards. True confidence does not need display. True confidence is quiet. It does not require external validation, because it does not depend on external validation. The person who needs you to know they are successful is not secure in their success. They are seeking confirmation that they might not believe without your reaction. The wealthy people who dress simply and drive modest cars are not making a fashion statement. They are revealing something about the nature of security itself. When you have enough, when you know you have enough, when your sense of self does not depend on others' perception of your resources, you stop needing to signal. The signal was always for you, not for them. It was always about quieting your own doubts, not about impressing strangers. And when the doubts are genuinely quiet, when the security is internal rather than performed, the signalling becomes unnecessary. It falls away naturally, not through discipline, but through irrelevance. This is what I mean by quiet wealth. Quiet wealth is confidence without display. It is security without explanation. It is choice without permission. It is the ability to walk into any room, dressed in unremarkable clothes, driving an unremarkable car, and know that none of it matters because your sense of self is not contingent on their assessment. This is not achievable through acting poor while feeling insecure. That is just a different kind of performance. This is achievable only through actually building security, actually developing confidence, actually becoming someone whose worth does not fluctuate with others' perceptions. And here is the practical path to that security, the path that status spending makes impossible, the margin of safety. Every dollar you spend on status is a dollar that is not building your buffer. Every payment committed to maintaining appearances is a payment not available for building wealth. The gap between income and expenses is not just a financial metric. It is a measure of freedom, of security, of psychological stability. The wider the gap, the calmer the mind. The narrower the gap, the more every day feels like survival. Most people, even high-earning people, live in survival mode, not because they earn too little, but because they spend too much. Their obligations consume their income so completely that any disruption threatens catastrophe. A job loss is not an inconvenience. It is an emergency. A pay cut is not manageable, it is devastating. The dominoes are set up so close together that touching one collapses them all. And this precarity, this constant low-level fear, is the price of status spending. You cannot have the appearance of success and the security of success simultaneously. One must be chosen, and most people, without realizing they are choosing, choose appearance. The alternative is to choose security, to build the gap, to live below your means not as punishment but as strategy, to recognize that simplicity is not the same as deprivation, that owning less is not the same as having less, that looking poor and being poor are almost opposites when you understand what wealth actually is. Wealth is not the amount of money you spend. Wealth is the amount of money you keep. The person who earns 100,000 and spends 99,000 is less wealthy than the person who earns 50,000 and spends 30,000. This math is obvious but emotionally invisible, because spending feels like having and keeping feels like missing out. We have been trained to measure success by consumption, to count our blessings by counting our possessions, to assess our worth by assessing our stuff. But this measurement is backwards. It measures the opposite of what it claims to measure. The big spender is not demonstrating wealth, they are demonstrating the absence of it. The visible markers of success are actually markers of money that no longer exists, converted from asset to object, from wealth to display. The person with the $47 million net worth driving the 20-year-old Civic has understood something that the person with the $100,000 income driving the $60,000 car has not. The Civic driver has decoupled their identity from their possessions. They have realized that the car is transportation, not communication. They have discovered that real security does not need witnesses. They have stepped off the treadmill and found that the ground beneath their feet is solid, that the race they were running had no finish line, that the prizes they were chasing were traps disguised as rewards. And here is what makes this philosophy practical rather than just aspirational. It scales. You do not need to be a millionaire to benefit from looking poor. The person earning $40,000 a year who lives like they earn 30 will build more wealth, more security, and more peace than the person earning $80,000 who lives like they earn 85. The math works at every level. The psychology works at every level. The freedom works at every level. You can start today, regardless of your income, by simply widening the gap between what comes in and what goes out. Every dollar of that gap is a dollar buying freedom. Every dollar spent on status is a dollar buying chains. But I want to address the objection that might be forming in your mind, because it is a reasonable objection and it deserves a response. The objection is that appearances matter, that how you present yourself affects how others treat you, that there are professional and social contexts where looking poor is actually costly, where the signalling game cannot simply be opted out of without consequences. And this is true. It is not true in the way that status spenders want to believe, but it is true in limited, specific ways. There are contexts where appearance creates opportunity. job interviews, client meetings, certain social environments. In these contexts, looking appropriate matters, and appropriate sometimes means expensive or at least polished. I'm not suggesting that you show up to a job interview in clothes that undermine your candidacy. I'm not suggesting that you ignore context entirely, but I am suggesting that the range of contexts where expensive signalling actually matters is far narrower than people believe. Most of the signalling we do is not strategic. It is habitual. It is performed for audiences who are not paying attention, in contexts where it provides no return, at costs that far exceed any plausible benefit. The designer label on your shirt is not noticed by most people. The brand of your car is not creating opportunities. The expensive watch is impressing no one whose impression matters. We signal constantly, reflexively, to audiences that exist mostly in our imagination, and we pay real money for this imaginary validation. The strategic approach is to signal when signaling actually matters, and to stop signaling when it does not. To own the appropriate clothes for the context that require them, and to wear unremarkable clothes everywhere else. To understand that status spending has severely diminishing returns, that the first $100 of appropriate dress provides almost all the benefit, and that the next 1,000 provides almost none. To invest in appearance only where appearance pays returns, and to invest in wealth everywhere else. This is what separates the truly strategic from the merely successful. The truly strategic understand that most of life does not require expensive signals. They understand that the internal security of wealth is worth more than the external appearance of it. They understand that freedom is purchased with the gap between income and expenses, and that every status purchase is a withdrawal from the freedom account. And they understand something else, something that seems paradoxical until you have experienced it. Looking poor is itself a form of wealth, not financial wealth, though it leads to financial wealth. Something more subtle. Looking poor means you're not enslaved to appearance. It means you have escaped the treadmill. It means your happiness is not contingent on continuous upgrades. It means your identity is not vulnerable to financial reversal. It means you have achieved something that most wealthy people never achieve: independence from the opinions of others. This independence is not easy to obtain. We are social creatures, wired to care about status, sensitive to the judgments of our peers. The desire to signal success is not a character flaw. It is a human universal, but recognizing the desire is not the same as surrendering to it. You can acknowledge that you want to impress people while choosing not to pay the price of impressing them. You can feel the pull of status spending while recognizing it as a trap. You can build a life that looks unimpressive from the outside while being profoundly free on the inside. The quiet wealth philosophy is not about deprivation. It is about clarity. Clarity about what actually makes you happy. Clarity about what security actually requires. Clarity about the difference between wealth and the appearance of wealth. Clarity about the costs of signaling and the benefits of stopping. When you look at the world through this clarity, everything changes. The expensive car becomes a depreciating liability rather than a symbol of achievement. The designer wardrobe becomes a maintenance burden rather than a source of confidence. The big house becomes a mortgage and a responsibility rather than a dream fulfilled. None of these things are inherently bad, but they are not what they pretend to be. They are not happiness. They are not security. They are costs masquerading as benefits, obligations pretending to be rewards. The person who looks poor by choice has seen through this masquerade. They have asked what they actually want, not what society tells them to want. They have answered honestly, not defensively, and they have built a life aligned with those honest answers, a life that might not photograph well, that might not generate envy, that might not signal anything to anyone, but that actually works. A life where the anxiety is manageable, because the obligations are manageable. A life where the future is secure because the present is not consuming all available resources. A life where identity is stable because it does not depend on unstable external validations. This is what wealth actually looks like. Not the display, not the performance, not the carefully curated appearance of success. Real wealth looks like someone who does not need you to know they are wealthy. It looks like confidence that requires no confirmation. It looks like security that needs no witnesses. It looks, from the outside, like nothing special. And that is precisely the point. The question I want to leave you with is this: who are you performing for? When you buy the thing you do not need, when you upgrade the thing that already works, when you signal status to people who will forget you by tomorrow, who is the audience? And is their fleeting attention worth the permanent cost? Most people never ask this question. They spend their entire lives running on a treadmill they never chose, performing for an audience they never identified, paying costs they never calculated, and wondering why wealth always seems just out of reach. It is out of reach because they are spending it. It is out of reach because they are converting potential wealth into visible consumption, trading freedom for appearance, choosing chains that look like prizes. You do not have to make that choice. You can step off the treadmill. You can stop the performance. You can look poor while building wealth, look ordinary while creating extraordinary security, look like nothing while becoming someone who has everything that actually matters. Real wealth does not need witnesses. It does not require your validation or anyone else's. It exists quietly, grows steadily, and provides something that status can never provide: the ability to stop caring what anyone thinks.